Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to Opus Magnum with Lyte. Today, we're looking at rocket propellant. It's relatively similar to something we've done before, but it's a bit different as well. And this was another one that I created a solution in a way that was not optimal, and then tried to optimize it, and then optimized it a little further from what we learned later. So, these three, twins, fraternal, and quick on the draw, are the speed challenges, but let's head into Ray and see the size challenge. So, with this particular one, we store our intermediate product on the exit such that we don't waste space, but here we use an empty hex. So there is a chance that this solution is not actually optimal. And so what we need to do is look at this and go, well, is there anything we could do to make this better? Because the most obvious idea would be to take the salt and move it over here, such that you can just salt it over here and not worry about it. Well, then what do we do with this space? Do we put the binder here? Well, if we have the binder right here, that runs you into trouble with trying to get everything back out, because you would need to bring the intermediate product over onto here, but you can't get through if the element is right here. So what else could we do? Because if we try to use an arm that uses a track, yes, that is cheaper, but it's not actually smaller, because any bit of track that you use is comparable to having an empty hex. So other options would be to have an intermediate product that gets stored here instead of up here, which admittedly seems like it might be possible. But you'll always run into the trouble of having to bind this product not on this exit point. And so you'll need something of this shape, which inevitably pokes up a little farther than one would like. So I am relatively confident that this solution is the smallest, but I still haven't beaten the game, so I don't have that global leaderboard showing me whether or not it is, in fact, the smallest anyone has done. Because there might be some configuration that I just don't see. But if you see it, I know there are some clever ones amongst you out there. Feel free to leave it down in the comments, on Twitter, or on Discord. So that's small, but not cheap. Well, when you've got a piston, you can generally get away with doing something cheaper by using either just an arm or an arm and a track. And in this case, all you need is an arm. There are a lot of these problems that you really just need one arm. And then if you need more, likely you just need to add a tiny bit of track and you're good to go. If it is absurd, you might need a piston. But in this case, you can construct the whole thing just using that arm, the binder, and the salter. And quite a bit of swinging around. And as you can see, well, the area is a little bit ridiculous for this solution because we keep swinging it around and around and around and around. So it goes. Now let's look at speed. This was another one where I was like, oh, look at that shape. It would be great with the sewing machine. Now we've modified the sewing machine a little bit to give you an easy way of pulling things out of it, and such that we can get this straight bit out of it. We just need one little piston to push it in the middle of working on it. And so we pull it out, we pull another, and then we rotate it onto the salter. We push it out such that we get that straight bit. Then, well, we need to rotate it a bit to get that angled crook right here. But the problem is this last bit needs to be salted. So we need this big old arm to swing it onto the salter and into the bin. Now, as we've learned from previous solutions, unlikely to be optimal. The other issue is that since they are, in fact, identical solutions, like we just mirrored the top onto the bottom, we need to have that little bit of a timing issue between the two, because it's such a large thing that you're dragging in. When you have it mirrored like this, you get a little bit of an overlap. That's just no good. So the first way to improve it, it's just by one cycle, but every cycle counts, is to make them ever so slightly different. So this top part is identical to how it was before. This bottom part is just ever so slightly different. By grabbing it from a different point, from a different place, we are now able to have the timing off by 1 cycle instead of 2. Previously, it was this, pulls in, drops, waits, and then pulls in, drops, waits. And so now if you listen to it while it's running, you can hear that interlocking sort of pulse to it where it isn't synchronized. It's kind of interleaved, and thus we have them closer together when we throw them in. Now we still have the problem of late salting, but at least we've optimized it a little bit to get you closer to what we're aiming at. Now, the sewing machine does a surprisingly good job aside from the need for a late salt. But it just pulls it right along. You keep pulling it out at the optimal speed, so it is asymptotically optimal. But as we've seen in the past, asymptotic is necessary, but not sufficient. So what do? Well, we start from scratch. We go, okay, so we can't salt it on its way out using the sewing machine. It just doesn't work. Because you can't drop that last one onto a salter. You want the last thing to be added to your rocket propellant to be fire, not salt. And so you can't build it onto the ends. You have to build it into the middle. And that's what we do here, is we need to have a way of having the fire be in the middle and the last thing that you add. And generally, you want the salt to be first because, well, it takes longer than everything else to make. Then you take into consideration what needs to be out of the way. And so what I do is I get the part that is closest to the exit out of the way first because it needs to travel the furthest. So we do that early. Then we get the salt over here. We get a fire that needs to be bound to it and bound over here. And then we shove in this last bit of fire right there at the end. So salt, fire that will go with that salt. Gonna turn into more salt. This guy comes up here such that we can drag it along more easily. And then we have this ready to go right at the end. This has already been grabbed such that we have that early grab such that we don't have to wait before throwing it in and dropping it. This guy is the same exact thing as down here, but since we don't have any sort of weird overlap with the exit, it can occur 1 cycle after this bottom part. See how we have this here? That's ready to go. This drops, this enters. And so the important thing to check is the distance that it takes for that last fire to get to the exit. So what it does is it comes here, that's 1 cycle, 2 cycles into the bin. We have asymptotic optimality and a final fire that comes into existence and then gets dropped in the bin. You can't expect to go faster than that. I'm not going to guarantee that you can't, but it's hard to imagine without having a way of getting them both into the exit at the same time, which I would expect to be a glitch, or if you had more than one product bin to fill. But this solution bears no resemblance to the other one, even though its cyclage is very, very similar. And that's an important thing to take to heart, that sometimes a solution by its nature will not get you as low as you need to go. and you need to recognize the features of one of those solutions that will make it impossible to optimize further. And for the sewing machine, it's that you can't salt the last product. If this was 2, 3, 4 salts, but had a fire on the end, sewing machine might be able to accomplish it. If it's 3 salts, definitely, because you'd have 2 fires that are on the binder right at the end. You just dump it in the bin. But if you had the first 3 salted, that's fine. You can salt them on their way out. But having a salt on each end means there's processing that needs to happen before the final input is produced. So in this particular case, I had to give up on the sewing machine to make something that will actually get the job done. Now, this is a really complicated bit of swinging arms to get to the final solution. It might be possible to do it with fewer arms, fewer binders, fewer tracks. But this one does get the job done. So if you've got a 33 cycle solution that costs less than 520, I would love to see it, because that means you did exactly what I did, just better. Flat out better. I like seeing how people do better than me, because it's how you learn. Hang out with people smarter than you. But that's all for this episode, because I showed you the cheapest, the smallest, and the fastest of my solutions. And once we actually finish the story mode, which I know I'm being really slow about it, I'm sorry. I like optimizing more than I like finishing. But once we get that, we'll be able to go back to my previous episodes, clean up any misconceptions about what is or is not the smallest, fastest, or cheapest. But for now, I will see you in the next episode of Opus Magnum with Lyte.